start, let me just introduce this event. And the way we usually work is I'll describe a little bit about what we do here. We'll go around the room. I know many people have already introduced themselves, but we'll give people one more chance to say who they are. And we're glad to have everybody here. A year and a half ago, when we took over the operation of Fairgrinds, we instituted what we call Fairgrinds Dialogues, which are on any number of subjects. We've talked about sports law, we've talked about Treme, we've talked about our local celebrities here in Fairgrinds last time, and a whole wide variety of other subjects. Today, we're going to talk about what we could call self-publishing or artisanal publishing. Glenn has been talking with me regularly and lobbying that there was just an untapped horde of people who had a novel in their computer or a bunch of poems. We have lots of chairs.
Yeah, pull up some chairs.
Over here, over here, over there.
There's some right there.
And as always, we never know whether there's going to be 6 people at a dialogue or 60. It's part of the excitement of putting the signs up and leaving the notes on the counter and seeing what happens. But that's what we have here. We always end at 8:30. I actually make my living as a community organizer and labor organizer, so I know a lot more about how meetings run, and after an hour and a half, people just get dangerous. I've seen it and don't want to go through it. So at 8:30, make sure you've said everything you've got to say, and when people are finishing before 8:30, we'll end, or you can talk to people individually. So that's sort of the rules of the road. We'll go through some short presentations by our learned panel and Glenn and everyone else, and then we will jump into what's on your mind. So what I'd like to do is just go around the room. As I said, my name is Rathke, here with Fairgrinds.
I'm Diana Smith.
I'm Rob Wold.
I'm Mark Foltz. I'm here for Oddwords, a literary listing website for New Orleans and also for Gallatin Toulouse Publishing Press.
I'm very well.
Alexandra Bassett, aspiring writer.
There you go.
Mike Bellamy.
Allison Roberts.
Jill Robertson, I read books.
Carol Roberts. I'm Diana Schwartz.
Dan Harrison. I drink the coffee.
I'm in
second row. This one.
Joe Mark.
And we have more people in the back. We have room to come in. You don't have to. Some people get closer in, though.
Is that, I don't want to get in the way of the shot right there.
Well,
it's okay, we'll be fine here. We'll keep it clear.
Okay, but we don't want anybody to break their neck trying to figure out what's going on. We've got plenty of room. Marie, would you like
I
to?
can put it up. I can move it to the middle or something.
Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Marie Hurt.
Beth Butler, a community voice.
Anna.
I'm Sam.
And then Sam.
Hi, Sam.
Hello.
Okay, so we've got a nice hearty crowd here. We'll just jump right in. All right, Glenn, you want to go ahead and start, please?
Great. As Wayne said, we're just going to talk for a very short time and then throw the meeting open because I think there's a lot of people here that are really interested in writing. My wife Diane and I have started a little press, a very tiny press, called Birds of the Air Press. We're going to talk to you about how and why we got started. And in fact, I'm going to read you my rejection notice from the University of Michigan Press. But first, a little background. As we all know, the computer is having a heavy impact on publishing, ebook, of course. And Christy Christensen was here last week talking about ebook. But what people might not realize is that the computers also had a big impact on the printed book. Because on your home computer now, with the software tools that are available, you can compose a whole completely sophisticated book. And this is going to end up in 2 PDF files. One for the so-called book block, which is the black and white part, and then a second is going to be a PDF file with the complete cover graphics, front, the spine, and the back. Now here's the really cool part. If you find a bookstore with an espresso book machine, you can send those 2 files off to that bookstore, and they can print a paperback like this in 10 minutes from your 2 files. And it's indistinguishable from what you can find on any bookstore shelf. So it's a whole new age. But this increased access to publishing, of course, has made the field a lot more crowded. And that's the fact we've got to deal with it. I'd like to read to you a couple of paragraphs from an essay entitled "The New Math of Poetry" by David Outpaw. The new math is stunning. Glenn Fulton, editor of Dust Books, which publishes the International Directory of Little Magazines and Small Presses, estimates the total number of literary journals publishing poetry 50 years ago as 300 to 400. Today, the online writer's resource Duotrope's Digest lists more than 2,000 current markets that accept poetry, with the number growing at a rate of more than 1 new journal per day in the last 6 months. Some of these journals publish 100 poems per issue, others just a dozen. If you proceed cautiously and assume an average of 50 poems per publication per year, more than 100,000 poems will be published in 2010. This article was 2 years ago. And approximately 86 million poems will be published in the 21st century. If Robert Frost's Road Not Taken were published next week by the New Formalist, Allen Ginsberg's Howl by Gnome, I've never known how to pronounce that one, Gnome, G-N-O-M-E, the online journal of underground writing, and Sylvia Plath's Daddy by Women Writers Zine. But none of these poets held teaching posts in creative writing departments. I wagered that their poems would not appear in the Best American Poetry 2010, or the Pushcart Prize 34, or make their way into the Norton Anthology. 3 of America's most widely read, genuinely loved poems would be published, but the event would be more like a funeral than a birth. So the point is, don't go home tonight and tell your partner that Glenn and Wade have made some great promises to you, right, Wade? Definitely not.
Not that I've heard yet.
Okay, good. All right, that's the low point, folks. At the same point in time, there are some real new possibilities. So let's get back to our story. I had written a manuscript about kinetic sculpture called Aesthetic Wilderness. And I decided I would go to a university press that specialized in ebooks. And there are now starting to be such university presses, with the idea that if you want a regular printed book, university press is going to take 2 or 3 years to get it into your hands. Okay, with an ebook, a lot faster turnaround. So I got in touch with the appropriate acquisitions editor at the University of Michigan Press, which was in the forefront of this area. His name is Mr. Thomas H. Dwyer. Hi, Tom, if you're watching. I got permission from him to send in my sample chapters and a proposal, and then, of course, what happened? We all know what happened. I waited. Every 2 months, I'd send him off very polite emails, and, hey, what's going on? Finally, after 9 months, I sent out this email, just thought, please, And here is the email that I got in response. My sincere apologies for the confusion. I thought you had sent a decline on your project. But clearly it has not reached you, or I am mistaken. I know personally how disconcerting it is to feel in limbo on a submission. I declined formally, but I wish you all success in finding other arrangements. And here, rather than reading some passages from my own book, I would like to read a couple of paragraphs from an essay that I wrote in response to this experience. Even if this email had not represented an obvious evasion, its curious wording and failure to say anything about why my proposal had been rejected would have given me scant hope that there had been at work a rational and compassionate evaluation process. I had waited until late in life to write about a disciplined which had been the object of 30 years of practice and study, and now, with 9 months gone of those few remaining to me, I stood back at square one in respect to academic publication. Screw this, I said to myself, and hence has been born Birds of the Air Press. The computer has changed everything. Once guarded by the church, and since then by academia and big city publishers, the door of the cage has been flung open, and we intend to fly through it. To make a long story short, my wife Diane and I dived into independent publishing. We set up a website, www.Birds of the Air Press. We signed up with R.A. Bowker, who is the official registrar for U.S. registrar for ISBN numbers, and bought a block of 10 ISBN numbers, cost $250. That's not so much, is it? But here's the key ingredient. McNally Jackson Bookstore, which happens to be located right in Manhattan. And they have one of these espresso book machines that I mentioned earlier, and they have an incredible deal. For a small initial fee, you can send your 2 files that I just mentioned off to McNally Jackson, and they'll put them on the database of the espresso book machine. Here's the really key part. They will also put your book on their e-commerce website. This is right in the middle of Manhattan. And each book has its own web page. And so anyone can go there, order a copy of your book, they'll print it on this machine, send it off to them, and every 6 months they send you a check for the accumulated royalties. And as a kind of further icing on the cake, if you buy a consignment copy, they'll put it on their shelves for 3 months. So you actually have a little bit of presence in Manhattan. I mean, some amazing stuff that we're talking about here. Now, Diana had actually preceded me in authorship. She had written this wonderful little novel about life in Louisiana called You Don't Know Me, so we put together her files and sent them off. 3 weeks later, we had this wonderful print book, which she took to her 50th high school reunion. That was quite something. Then I followed a short while later with my book, Aesthetic Wilderness. And then we published Grantley Rushing's book of haiku, drunk haiku, and we're so happy that Grantley's here with us tonight to share his experiences. He's going to be talking in a minute. All right, so you've noticed that our focus at Birds of the Air Press has been on the print book as opposed to the e-book. Now, let me say right off, if you think your manuscript has real popular appeal, go directly to the e-book. No doubt about that. All right. But a book can be a very important thing, even if it doesn't sell a lot of copies. And I would kind of like to refer to that as here's this big word: personal authentication. Now, in my own case, there's probably no more than 24 copies of this book in print. However, one of those copies is in the hands of the assistant director of one of the most important kinetic art museums in the world. Second is in the hands of the managing editor of an important journal, and so on. So it's a great way to get yourself out there. A book. Or let's talk about the personal level. Let's say you've written a family history. Well, I can tell you definitely your mom's going to want a print copy of your family history. She's not going to want to hear, oh, it's out there on the internet, Mom, you can go look at it. No, she's going to want her own print copy to put on her nightstand, right? So in short, the printed book has a reality that the e-book might never have. You know, you've got the whole reading experience. You've got the front cover, you've got the back cover with the blurb and artist bio and so forth. And so here, by way of introducing Grantley, he's not quite neck. Don't get too excited. A few more minutes, but let me go ahead and read from the back cover of Grantley's book, Drunk Haiku by Grantley Rushing. Hold on. How best to endure the modern world except by getting drunk, and how best to endure drunkenness except by writing haiku. Here is a do-it-yourself guide to Basho's venerable art, complete with 51 contemporary examples. be the first on your block to learn haiku. And soon others will be turning off their cell phones to scribble on damp coasters. And here's Grantley's little bio. A native of Jackson, Mississippi, Grantley Rushing served on a nuclear missile submarine before graduating in literature and philosophy from Ole Miss. He resides now in New Orleans, where he is a musician, boulevardier, and much appreciated member of the food and beverage industry. Okay, so much for
Both
all
on both sides. Purchaser and perpetrator. All right, sorry.
No, that's great. All right, let's, so much for all this history and background. Let's get to the real news for tonight. Brantley and Diane and I, because we all live in this neighborhood, and having, cranked up birds of the air press, God, wouldn't it be so great if we could have a little nest over here at the fairgrounds with all these literary people. And then I happened to meet Wade 5 months ago, and come to find out that he is into publishing also with his public policy press, which publishes very serious books about politics. And this is Wade's book about the aftermath of Katrina. Terrific. So to make a long story short, we're here tonight to announce that if there's a sufficient interest, we are going to crank up an imprint under the aegis of public policy press whose mission will be to help get anyone who's interested, dive on board and get their work published. And it's going to be possibly to be called, what else? Fairgrounds Press. So this is a way cool development. And one final note. Everything that I forgot to mention that Birds of the Air Press, we're just going to dive on board with this, and we're going to help out with this. Okay, we're going to forget our own initiative, because if we can work with Wade at Fairgrounds, I mean, like, wow, Everything that we've done so far has been on a voluntary basis, and we're going to continue to volunteer as much as we can. At some point, however, if this thing really takes off, the people that are spending time doing editing, cover designing and so forth, they're going to need to make a little money for their efforts. And here somebody in the audience might say, wait a second. I thought I was here to hear about publishing tonight. Publishers, they bear all the cost of getting a book into print, and sometimes they even they offer a little cash advance, right? So it sounds like what you guys are talking about is more like the vanity press. And that's where I'd like to bring in this very important idea of independent publishing. Don't forget that, independent publishing. Guy Kawasaki, who is the original Macintosh evangelist, I don't know if any of you guys remember, this is back in 1984, ancient history stuff, is now promoting this idea of artisanal publishing. And he's got this little acronym, APE, A-P-E. The author is both the publisher and the editor. Author, publisher, editor, APE. That's his idea. My thought is it's kind of sad to do everything yourself. And it's a lot better to have some involvement from other people. So, in regard to how Fairgrounds Press is to avoid the stigma of being a vanity press, I'd like to read you a couple of paragraphs from an email I sent to Wade just a few weeks ago. In regard to how Fairgrounds Press is to avoid the stigma of being a vanity press, it has occurred to me that we can operate as an independent press. And people have your bullshit meters on right now, because this is when you need to have them on, okay? Analogous to an independent record label or independent movie producer. And here I am talking about a real independent record label such as one might find in the alleyways of New Orleans. I'm talking about a little, hole-in-the-wall independent record producer, First, it is understood that such an operation is small, informal, and with a personal relationship between all involved, including the artist in question. I.e., this is not purely commercial work for hire, but instead depends on some level of personal rapport. Second, and as a closely related aspect, it is understood that such entities operate on a shoestring. And so we are not going to be able to cover, all of the costs of getting work into production. A songwriter who approaches a small indie record label, for example, realizes that he or she might have to cover some of the costs out of their own pocket. But there is a corresponding assurance for said songwriter that he or she will be working with a small, committed group with high production standards and really do give a crap about the final product. So, in conclusion, none of us know where this is going, but we have a possible blueprint. So now, turn it over to Brantley. Okay, so Brantley is going to talk about his experience in all of this.
Okay, so, yeah, as you can imagine, the author of a book called Drunk Haiku. I'm completely unprepared, no notes whatsoever. But my job, I figure, is to kind of talk about just the subjective experience that I had, which is that these two marvelous people, Glenn and Diana, I waited their table. I'm no longer a waiter. I'm back where I belong in the kitchen. But I went to the dark side for a couple of years, a year and a half. And so I was waiting on their table. And Glenn, being the extremely inquisitive and enthusiastic person he is, asked my name, and I said, Charles Brantley Rushing. He said, you sound like an author. And I said, well, I've heard that before. And he said, have you written any books? And I almost said no. And then I remembered that I have all these paper bags full of coasters and ticket books and whatever else I've been collecting since '96 of all these haiku, and that I had actually written an introduction to what I thought was a book. It was a long time ago. And he said, well, we want to see it. And he explained Birds of the Air Press to some degree. And we talked at length. We talked for a while. I was being a very bad waiter, told me other tables. And lo and behold, there's this. And this is, and I had drawn, this says Drunk Haiku in Japanese that I did with India ink years ago, and pulled it up off of my hard drive and gave it to Glenn, who did a magnificent job of organizing the poems, rewrote the introduction, and the next thing I know, I had this book. And there's a couple of interesting things. I mean, just in terms of having this book, I have 10 copies at home, and I bought them all, right? But I show up and it comes up a conversation, and it's, and then I want a copy of your book, and I give it to them whatever I paid for it, or I can charge whatever I want. And it's got an ISBN, so it's available for sale, and I can put it in a bookstore, and they can scan it. And
let me just jump in here for a second. Brantley's book, he bought some copies from McNally Jackson, but there have been 5 walk-in sales at McNally Jackson. I know that doesn't sound like much. If you say, 5 sales at one bookstore, and then you multiply that by all the bookstores in the world, it's a pretty darn interesting number. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it's just cool. Well, and my friends on Facebook, have, every now and then I'll remember that I wrote this, and I'll post a link to the McNally Jackson website where they have a place for this, and several of my friends have bought it. And so it's just, it's just cool. It's just cool as hell. And the fact that I met these folks through this, that they, sitting in a restaurant, felt empowered, like as themselves, to say, well, if you have something interesting, we can do something interesting with it. We can potentially help you out. And having a copy of this, I haven't yet, but I need to send it to all my professors so they know that I haven't dropped off. And it was a really neat experience to have. And it is different than Vanity Press in the sense that I think that if it were in that, why would they do it? Why would they do it for me as opposed to me doing it? They bought a certain number of ISBNs, and they said, well, you have one. you go ahead and have one of these, and then, because we like what you do. And that's about all I got on that. I mean, it was just, it's been an interesting and ongoing experience, because Glenn so deeply believes in the evolution of this idea that he's kept me on board, and he's kept me thinking about where can this go and what does it mean, and I have a band, and what he said about independent musicians, I mean, it's the same thing, where you go to a record label and they're going to say, well, give us your recording that you've already spent $2,500 to make, and we'll put it out. Well, then, typing on your typewriter doesn't cost $2,500, it costs nothing at all. So, just your time. So it's been magnificent. It's been really, really cool, and it's neat to. In fact, I have my stack at home, and I don't want to get rid of them. I mean, they're cool. I have them, and if somebody comes over, they're like, "What are those?" I'm like, "Oh," But it's been neat, and I also want to make a plug. Glenn, I have perused your book. It's very interesting reading, but y'all, I'm telling you, this thing will blow you away. I'm absolutely, I just have to say this. I've told Diana, listen, you've got to read this thing. It'll kill you. You won't even believe it. I mean, and I think that's another aspect of this is that, vanity, I write it, I give it to them, they print it. Well, in this case, other people have to read it. Other people have to believe in it. Other people have to want to do it and agree to put it out there. And even if it's one other person, it's at least an agreement. It's at least an interesting thing. And y'all get that.
I got it.
Yeah.
Here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you read, you go, no, wait a minute. I have access. And I was like, this is not a true story. She's like, it's absolutely a true story. And you won't believe it. You won't believe it. But anyway, so I guess I'm done. That's just the subjective, the really interesting, beautiful experience of having, something published so easily. And
There you go.
and you can, if I wanted to, I could take my stack and I could drive around the bookstores and sell it and have my own book tour or do whatever I want. And I believe these people when they tell me they like it, so I've got that behind me. So there you go.
So being the third leg on the stool, let me share the experience because as you can tell, Glenn is a tireless promoter of this idea, and it was actually easier to finally put this on the agenda for a dialogue and continue to meet and discuss and try to figure out what in the world, because he believed there would be people interested in this topic and who had interest and ambitions in this direction. So it's actually, I have to say he was right and I was doubtful, but the crowd itself says something. Here's my experience. After Katrina, I signed a contract with a progressive British and American press called Verso. It used to be called The Left. I forget the name of what it used to be called. But Verso is a well-known publishing company, largely of progressive nonfiction. And they wanted a book, The Battle of the Night for the Ninth Ward, about the experiences of New Orleans rebuilding after Katrina, particularly the role of community organizations like Acorn played. So I met them in London. They were going to do this, that, and the other. I had a dateline, a contract, several copies of it. They sent me $1,000, blah, blah, blah. 6 months goes by, I'm madly trying to meet the deadline, and suddenly I can't get a hold of the editor. Well, it wasn't that they had rejected the book, as Glenn said. It wasn't that they didn't think the draft that I'd sent them thus far was good. It's just I couldn't find the guy. I'm calling him, whatever, I'm tracking him down like a bloodhound. Well, it turned out that a very famous writer named John Berger, the guy I was dealing with, ended up having to edit for them. It's a small press. The world is changing for publishers. Essentially, 6 months finally, he got back to me and said, well, we're embarrassed, we just don't have the time to do it all. Katrina is getting farther in the rearview mirror, we're not sure that we want to go ahead. We'll publish it if you want us to, but we're not going to really support it. Well, that was an education. I then signed another contract for another book with a very good press, Barrett Kohler out of San Francisco, and published a hardback called Citizen Wealth, running the campaign for working families. Well, that was even more interesting. Once again, great editor, was recruited to write the book, loved the experience. But then comes showtime. You meet the publicist, they take you out to San Francisco, they put you up in a hotel, you meet with their whole staff, 20 people, and they tell you, and, you know, I've been an organizer all my career. And it became very clear the real truth was, you sell the book. They don't sell the book. I mean, you start trying to, what exactly does the publicist do? Well, he sets up a couple of appointments with bookstores, but then you set them up yourself. And so if you're going to really sell the book, and you learn, well, what's a best-selling book? Well, all of us who read the New York Times Book Review or whatever it is, a best-selling book must be millions of copies, hundreds of thousands of copies. Well, a best-selling book, particularly in trades, particularly in nonfiction, is less than 5,000 copies. Oh, 5,000 copies. Once again, I'm a community organizer. I'm a labor organizer. 5,000 copies is not a lot of copies of anything. And in nonfiction or, you know, more political work like I do, actually a best-selling book, truth to tell, is more like 2,500. And they make money, you don't make money, but they make money after you sell the first 1,500. Then you start reading more about it. And there's, you know, the whole concept of how you handle ebooks. Well, that's printed books what I'm talking about. But ebooks obviously has a whole world of itself. A month ago here at the Dialogue, we had several of our local authors, Chris Champagne, who's done very well with a book called The Yat Dictionary, which we had him up here because I swear to God he wrote the book in that back leather chair in Fairground, so he was going to be here. And then another woman who'd written something called Young Adult Fiction, category I wasn't familiar with, but it turned out like a dozen different scenes were set in Fairgrounds. Commented on the muffins and dogs and so I thought, well, you know, isn't this wonderful? A whole, like a Fairgrounds novel. I mean, it was somehow supernatural and this young girl could do anything and live forever, but I won't go into that. But anyway, she went through her experience. Now, she had a physical copy of the book. We have it downstairs across from the coffee bar. But she took the advice of people like Kawasaki, and in order to introduce her book, and you can all sell books in the independent press, you can sell books through Amazon, as you probably know. You can sell hardbacks, you can sell in different ways, you can sell ebooks. So she offered her book as one of these, twice, as one of the specials ebooks. Well, the first time, 1,200 copies were picked up and downloaded. It was free, but that's 1,200 people she knew actually got the book. The second time, I think she said it was more like 1,800.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same thing. So all of a sudden, 3,000 books flew, so to speak, off of those, you know, viral shelves and ended up in somebody's computer or in somebody's Kindle or in somebody's, you know, whatever. And she had 3,000 people who were either going to read it as I read her book, try to underline on my Kindle everything that said Fairgrounds. People might have actually, 3,000 people might have read that book. So that's interesting to me, is how do you look at the tools, the technical tools, and the democratization of the printed word or of the literary or life production of somebody, and the fact that, man, a lot of people have something to say. And rather than there being a mountain to climb to have to say that, if people are willing to learn how to use these tools and are willing to get out there and hustle, who can say? This 50 Shades of whatever, that sold a gazillion book, actually seems to have started out much that way, through a very small venture, and she got out and hustled it. And I can't say that I've read that book, but I can say that she has sold one, you know, bushel barrel full of them. Having that experience with both Verso and then Barrett Kohler, when it came to the last two books that we wanted to do, we we put out a journal. Social Policy is a magazine. It's actually not called Public Policy, but Glenn is so enthusiastic, I've never corrected him. The Social Policy is a 40-year-old journal that we publish and put out every quarter. Sometimes I bring extra copies here at Fairgrounds. You may have seen it, you may have not. But it's read by academics. The business model is we sell very, overpriced subscriptions to libraries, which then finances us to sell lower priced, copies of the magazine on the web for virtually nothing, and for subscriptions. So, Social Policy has now printed 3 books, and in my experience with the publishers I've gone through is that if we were willing to hustle the books, why not do it? And we published all 3 of those books right here in New Orleans using a printer here, using skilled layout people here, using cover designers here out of New Orleans. And in all of those cases, we've sold, the first one was for an author and his wife, who was an organizer out of Kentucky. So he moved 2,000 copies, the rest have moved 1,000 to 3,000. So we're happy with that. And once again, rather than having to, worry about somebody in San Francisco and realize, we is me and the rat in my pocket who's selling these books. It's not somebody else. It's not that, when you look at, and it was an education, and I don't discourage anyone from getting the education, but for all of you who are aspiring writers and who think of writing books, then I think the challenge for you is not just how to climb the ladder of those 3 or 4 established presses that might still be willing to take a chance on somebody new, but whether or not there aren't real skills and abilities to go ahead and get the job done. Kawasaki argues that if you're going to sell ebooks particularly, and he's very skilled at this, it's worth having an editor because none of us are good enough. And he does crowdsourcing to edit his books and gets 500 different people to comment on corrections and still hires an editor because they still miss stuff. My editor is a PhD in English literature from Princeton. It really turns out that you write a lot the way you talk. And I talk very enthusiastically, and I can move people, from here all the way across the world. But I also write almost exactly that way, and sometimes that translation is rough. You need to be humble to the task. Everybody needs an editor. And then, if you're going to sell ebooks, you want something that jumps out. I'm not saying this is perfect, but you can't look at Vanessa Geringer here on the cover of this book without thinking, well, what in the world is she yelling about? Who's going on? Megan was actually on the other side of her, but thank God I didn't put him in, he wasn't in the picture. This would be, in the crime section as opposed to the, political section. But on the print books we do, I really believe in pictures. Each one of them has 100 different pictures. I know people can read. I really do believe that. But you want to, and this is what I've learned in putting out a magazine, the more the words, the more you want to draw people into the story in other ways. The book I'm writing now about, called Nuts and Bolts, about organizing, I really want, like a cartoonist or the graphic thing going on for the same reason. So I'm sure that's not true in poetry books or novels or whatever, but this is nonfiction what I know about. And because I'm an organizer, I really want people to read it. If they don't read it and they're hustling me, I really want them to look through the pictures and try to figure out what's going on. And I want them to get the book. So for me, it's all about distribution and how many people end up with that book or ebook or PDF or whatever it is in their hands. And so part of what is interesting about the dialogue today, this is now the segue to all of you asking questions, talking about what you want to talk about. So part of what's interesting is what are people's various philosophies? What are the values that people see in publishing books? And in, I think, what I call the democratization of publishing. I've got an uncle who is obsessed with my mother. He's my mother's brother, and he's been obsessed for 20 years with the history of his family. I can't explain why, I can't really make it through reading about it, but it is now hundreds of pages, and you're quizzed on it every time you talk to it. But there's a perfect example. That could have been easily put between covers as Glenn was arguing, or frankly over email, so all of his nephews and grandchildren and everybody else had easier access to it, and that would have value at a cost that would never have phased the guy. I think Glenn has made this point to me so often that maybe it's true or maybe I've just come to believe it's true. I think a lot of people start different works of different kinds and sort of lose their way. And I think sometimes having a facility where other people might be able to look at it and say, yeah, I mean, let's get this done. Let's see if we can make something happen. We'll help do it. Here's, I don't know, I tried to find out, what do you call that machine? The
Espresso vote machine?
The city of the public library system had 2 of these 100,000 plus espresso machines. So when Glenn was telling me about espresso machines, I get on the blower, I call down, talk to 3 people, finally get somebody, hey, where is this espresso machine? I've been hearing about it, I want to come look at it, I hear you have 2. Well, the long, sad, it's such a classic New Orleans story. The long, sad story is they had 200,000 plus machines. They never could get either one to work. They got almost 2 copies out of one of them, and finally just had the company pick them up and take them away. So I don't know about the espresso machines. Whoever the, Smith, Hartley, and Brown, or whoever it is that you're talking about that prints them, McNally Jackson, whatever, they clearly know what they're doing. There was a thought that these are very high-end Xerox productions that some people were hoping bookstores and others would get, so that people would just walk in and walk out, essentially, later in the day with a full book. Maybe that'll work, maybe it's not going to work. It certainly seems to be an idea ahead of its time. But we have printers here, and it's not that expensive really to do a book, depending on what you want to do and how you want to do it. So what I'd like to do, and trying to moderate this, is just throw it open for the next 40-odd minutes and see what questions people have, what ideas, what you've been thinking about, questions you may have. We may not have an answer, but maybe we have somebody that does. Oh. Go.
Regarding the Fairgrounds Press, that is a concept right now. That's not
very much a concept. It's an idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm asking the question, because it's just something
Good.
we're out there. Are there going to be any formalized agreements, such as contracts or anything like that?
I'm so glad that you asked this question. This is an idea. There is a press, social policy press. There is a coffee house called Fairgrounds.
Right.
And this is all a conversation about what our community, because we're a very community-based coffee house, what needs there are. So I'm not saying we might not figure out how to do what Glenn's talking about, but at this point there's no concrete plans to do anything other than have this conversation and see what happens.
Another question.
Okay, one more question, we'll throw it back open again.
Okay. I know that you're doing social policy.
Right.
Okay. I myself have worked in area justice for like the last 20 years of my life. I'm an aspiring author. I have a lot of material to draw from. And one of the questions that I had that I'm kind of trying to decide, and it's kind of like a legal question, because at some point in time, I was thinking I may have to make the work more of a fiction-based or a narrative-based work for 2 reasons. One, for readership, to make it a little bit more palatable. Secondly, because the legalities involved, because there's going to be some people's names that are high-ranking people that are going to be involved. And so, for the sake of legalities, I kind of wanted to, I'm toying around with that idea of approaching it more as a narrative or a fictionalized version of something, like a story that's based on truth.
Well, let me answer it this way.
Okay.
So, since I answered your first question that it's absolutely a concept, there's nothing about the Fairgrounds Press, it's not 100% tentative. But on the second question, if you really have the list that has a bidder's name on it, we will print that baby today.
I don't have that one.
Oh, well, damn, okay, well, I was taking a shot. I didn't know exactly what you might have in terms of that computer, but,
No, I deal
because I
with-
know we could sell that.
I deal more with judges,
Yeah.
federal and state.
Well, those are interesting questions, and as I say, we've all practiced law without a license most of our lives, so I don't know that I'm more qualified than somebody else to answer it, but that's an artist's judgment, essentially, on the traffic and what you think it'll bear. Other points, questions, comments?
Mark, I'd like to give a Mark, because I want to make the point, Mark, that we're birds of the air press. This is kind of an open, we're not trying to come in here and elbow other people out of the way. I think it's going to be more successful.
Well, there's no way to elbow people out.
Yeah, I probably had a couple of questions. First, do you think the espresso book model scales? If I get 100 copies, is it going to go down $1.50 a copy?
It gets cheaper. But
100 copies, it gets cheap,
Okay.
or cheapish.
Cheapish.
At 20 copies, not so much, but yeah, when you start talking 100 copies, I think over that, I sent him an email like, what if I want 1,000 copies? They're like, well, just talk to us,
Right.
But yeah, definitely
And if you want 1,000 copies, there are a lot of
20, all right, this book, I think
digital
if I,
publishers out there who will do short press run work from a PDF file. If you know what you're doing, you know how to design a book.
Well, there are mainstream publishers right here in New Orleans that'll publish 1,000 for a very good price. Depending on how long, it's based on length and number of pictures.
Yeah, I didn't even research local presses when I was looking to self-publish a book, and later with a partner, Stark Dalton, to lose a publisher on one book so far, 1.5. Which is interesting because I started looking online basically for large digital presses, not large digital presses, digital
Well,
presses.
Pelican and all these established New Orleans publishers are all printed locally
Okay.
by a local printing company. I mean, most of them are Harahan, but
I was just looking, we were looking for someone with specifically could be able to produce trade paperbacks well under $5 a copy, for $2, $3 a copy.
how long is the question?
Those companies are out, how long a press run? As little
Now,
as
how
2
many
months.
pages do you want to get for $5?
160.
You can get that, you can get a $5 book on that kind of press run for 160 pages right here in the city.
Okay, that's good. Although I like people I've used in Detroit, and the other company I just used out of Brooklyn on another project. I think the real issue, two things. If Guy Kawasaki is saying be your own editor, don't.
He's not saying that, he's saying hire an editor. I thought it was clear.
Okay.
He's
If
saying
you're
hire a cover designer, because if you want to sell books, you need that, because people make their decisions not on what's inside the book, but on what's outside. And if you don't want to be embarrassed, hire an editor, no matter what.
I studied advertising, and what you see appeals to people.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you don't have something that looks good, it's just like a dress or a pair of shoes, nobody's gonna buy it.
Right, no, the first book we
Yes,
did,
they have really bad taste.
we paid a designer, he was the former cartoon artist for Gambit.
Yeah.
And he did a lovely job, did a beautiful title.
Uh-huh.
He screwed up his PDF and he was a professional designer. But I fortunately worked in a pre-press shop before. And I'm like, dude, your bleeds are wrong. The big thing, I think, people who are looking for a way to get themselves published. Getting the book into that format is the easiest part. Getting it written is obviously a harder part. Finding someone who will edit it carefully for little or nothing, when most people would charge you a couple $1,000s. At least hundreds of dollars for just a manuscript, reading some notes. Your manuscript sucks, changes character. 5 typewritten pages will cost you $500. The hard part is selling it.
Right.
And it does require an investment if you're going to do it yourself, or it requires a small publisher who's willing to gamble $1,000 on the first 200 copies. print that many in advance, and then hustle them around the bookstores in town. Because that's what you're gonna have to do, is you're gonna have to get your books on the shelves, and you have to be careful about how you produce it. You can't use create space. Don't wipe that out of your mind, because you'll walk into Octavia, you'll walk into Garden District, you'll walk into any other local bookstore. You'll show them your book, they'll open it up, they'll look at the black fly leaves, and they'll see the little barcode, which is the mark of the beast of indie bookstore, that says this book was printed at Create Space. And a number of the online publishers have those. So they're to be watched out for, because they might not want to, Octavia may not want to take the book. This happened to Mark LaFleur. He just launched his novel downtown. Sorry, amazing Larry the other night, and
Thank you.
they were reading in Garden District, but he basically got thrown out of Octavia because he had the market of beast on the back of his book for Amazon. The hard part is really getting, you can sell your book, you can actually make money. First book we did, all the content was contributed by the authors, because all of the profit, if any, was going to the widow of one of the contributors, a guy named Ashley Morris. And on the first 200 copies, we managed to cut our check for about $600. So yes, if you're willing to invest a lot of sweat equity in it, you could sell a book locally. You could sell 200 copies and actually pocket some money. Getting outside of town is a little more difficult. It's a whole other.
Well, and be clear about bookstores. I mean, on hardbacks or soft cover, you have to accept returns from the bookstore. So once you put 10 books in, the publisher, if only 3 sells, the publisher buys back the 7 they're going to sell at whatever the publisher's price is. So, Martin, making this point, it is selling. Selling is actually getting the money and you never see the book again.
Right.
Selling is not renting space at a bookstore to then have to go pick up the book again.
Right.
So
We actually managed to get them out on a no returns basis, 60-40%.
and for all of the heinous abuse that Amazon takes from some people in placing books, Amazon is the only one who buys 100%. Whatever they buy, they don't return. So when they bought 150 of my Citizen Wealth books, that's done. I mean, you'll never, because they have the long tail. They believe somebody will buy 3 of them next year. That's okay. I mean, they've got the warehouse space, and somebody buys 10 the year after, they'll get rid of their 150 books, or if they haven't already. But that's, smaller independent publishers don't necessarily have the storage space that an Amazon has with, the zillion, million. Other points, questions? Yeah. If I were doing this, I wouldn't want 3 chapters. It's all in the first 10 pages. People make their decision about buying books and reading books at the beginning.
Yeah,
Academic presses run assuming that somebody's going to sign the book and ask a test question in the 50th chapter. So they assume that you've got this leisurely beginning and you can work 5, 10 chapters out of a 20-chapter book and get it done. That's not the way people read anymore. That's not the temperature of the American community now, or anywhere else in the world. So it's all in the beginning. It's all those, if you got 10 strong pages and an outline that drives the book, you've got a book or you don't have a book. That's my experience. I mean, I'm not a publisher except for this stuff, but that's my experience. I've just got 2 from you. I'm going to get some more first and come back if there are. In the back, second row. Yes, sir.
Who's going to be the person that makes that decision? Who's the editor-in-chief? Who's going to be the crap filter? Because obviously you can have somebody that's going to give you something that's nothing but crap. You're going to waste one of your ISBN numbers on that if they're willing to pay for it. I know you worry about, maybe this guy is the next James Joyce and this is fitting in his wake, and I just don't understand it. Or maybe it's just pure crap.
There's just no substitute for good judgment.
But who's going to exercise that good judgment?
If it's coming on a press that I'm involved in, I don't have any problem exercising the judgment. But once again, I want to underline, this is all conceptual discussion. Because, part of, if you came to me and said, look, I have this 150-page family history of the Roberts family that, goes back the last 100 years, and, I want your help figuring out how to get an editor, how to put it together, what's a good price and a good place where I get a quality job, who can help me do a cover, because this is what I want in time for the 50th anniversary of my parents, to have this book as part of it. Well, practically speaking, I don't have to make an editorial judgment. It's your family, it's your history. So I think then it's we're able to partner with you and help you get that done. Now that I don't have any question about. Now, if all of a sudden you want me to put skin in that game, you had to say, here's my 150-page history of my family, I want you to pay for it. Well, you know, we don't really have a license for what you need to drink here at this coffee house. It's all chicory, it's espresso, it's whatever, but we don't have that license. And you know, that's a different judgment. I mean, but I think for me, it's all, as I said, it's in the outline, it's in the first page, and it's how hard people are willing to work. I mean, in selling it. If they really have, if they're telling me, yeah, they can really sell it, and I'm looking at their Facebook page and it has, you know, 53 people on it, and they're not even sure that Twitter is something for them, and they aren't willing to go knock on doors cold, I can tell them right now they're not going to sell those books, and, you know, unless they want to be like our friend and have a stack at the house to impress friends, you know.
Well, what do y'all think the future holds with regard to ebooks versus written books?
Ebooks are going to dominate.
I mean, the big booksellers are having trouble right now.
Definitely, most definitely.
You know,
As long as there are rich people, there will be printed books. But
I
the
think
masses are going to end up reading ebooks. You know, school systems are forcing people to come to school with iPads. You know, people, there's an article in the New York Times today that professors can tell whether you opened the ebook, how many underlines you did, what chapter you got to, and whatever. Now, if you're a college professor, you're going to want that information. Why sit up there like, you know, Mr. Jerkhead and say, read these 3 books and wonder at exam time if people did it, if you actually know on an ebook because you have the software whether the people read it or didn't. I mean, if you're really talking about education, I mean, that's some pretty serious technical advances people are
Yeah, I
making.
mean, the carbon footprint of a printed book is much bigger than the footprint of an ebook.
What now?
The carbon footprint of a printed book, the
I'm
MG.
glad-
yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something I skipped over in my presentation. And let me just quickly cover, for these kind of books in one's personal library, I think you could argue that, you know, if there's just a few 50 or 100 copies, there's going to be less environmental impact with a printed book than having it out on a server that's having to be quivering out there, you know, out in San Francisco or wherever, and using megawatts of power to keep your book online, and you might have to download it and so forth. When there's really only going to be a fairly select audience that's going to have this book and is going to refer to it over and over again. So I think the carbon footprint's going to be less.
Doesn't sound like an intimate experience. Just
Excuse me?
You made it sound like a much more intimate experience with the self-published book.
Right,
than
right.
Than the internet.
Exactly, right. Mr. Bellamy here,
Yeah.
Dr. Bellamy had a question.
I've had, just to confirm what you're saying, I know several people who are academic editors, and they make a decision in 5 pages. Articles, books. Yeah, they don't have time either to read this stuff. And if you don't get it out there right away, it's not going to happen.
Well, do you shop on Amazon for books at all?
Yeah.
Do you go in, you look into the book when they offer it? I mean, you make the decision based on a fairly short sample of pages.
Well, I do it by word of mouth mostly.
Yeah,
But,
well, I mean-
yeah, when you got something, you got, you know, 3 chapters, and you're not moved by the first 5 pages.
And look,
It's the same everywhere, it's all.
there's a bitter experience, you know, and nobody should be naive. When I first did my book, I mean, I talked to people who hadn't read the book, but you can get so much of a book from Amazon. I mean, so they had 100 pages rather than 200. I think it was what I was saying. They didn't really think they had to pay $25 for that book. You know,
Another thing you'll find about Amazon, probably because you're coming out of a journal with a large library base, yes, they're going to buy 150 books from you. You are going to find that Fairgrinds Press will lose about 35 cents on every book that's on Amazon through the Advantage program.
Wow.
You will lose on a $14.95 cover price, the average price of producing a book, you're gonna lose 35, 45 cents on every book.
Yeah, I had fun to think about the math. I mean, you pay a fixed rate monthly charge to be part of it. So if you're not gonna sell more than $35 worth of books on a month, you're gonna be down in that month. But I think it all depends on, you know.
That's actually on an individual copy basis, pretty much regardless of volume. And the advantage is it's not a good channel for a small startup press that's looking to sell hundreds or even just a couple thousand.
Yeah, if you're only gonna sell 100, you know, I don't really know.
The Libris, there are other book distribution channels online that you can go to, as well as yourself. You can set up a web page.
Well, I think we put it on all of them, right? We put it on Libris, we put it on Amazon. I mean, we're
Well,
equal opportunity
We could
salespeople.
actually have our own ebooks. That's a possibility.
Well, yeah, you can, I mean, Libris lets you do your own.
Yeah.
Amazon lets you do
Ebooks
your
are different. I'm talking about hard books, about trade paperbacks.
I'd like to hear from some of the other aspiring writers here. This young lady was one, this young man. I think Alexander's an aspiring writer. I'm guessing maybe Diana is also.
Well, let's hear it.
And I'd like to, because I'm hoping that you were encouraged by what you heard tonight. That was the idea. And so.
Well, I'll just start. I'm primarily a performing artist, and I've written several solo pieces and performed and produced them. And
Is this in music?
well, I write songs, but
Oh, okay.
no. For instance, I have written a solo performance. It's about 40 or 50 minutes long about the Baroness von Talbot, and I've produced it several times with New Orleans. It's something that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking
It's
about.
like a one-person play?
It's a one-person play,
Okay.
and I use music.
Which might work really well as a book.
Yes, and I've specifically been asked after performances, do you have a copy of this that I can buy?
Well, yes, this is perfect.
And so that, you know,
Okay.
so I'm wondering how, you know, I've been thinking about ways that I can, of course I would like to have these things in, you know, but what is the best way to do that? You know, go to Kinko's and do a chapbook or whatever. No, I'd much rather, you know.
Sure.
Personally, I mean, I'm a very tactile person. I just, you know, I don't like to read books on the computer. I like to have something. I like paper. I like the smell of books, you know. And so I'm thinking, but I'm also thinking, you know, I want something that's going to last, and I also want something that I can sell to someone, which can then help me continue to produce the performing work.
This could be the perfect thing for you because you have a distribution network based on when you do the performance, people are going to want a copy. So, yeah, you should definitely talk to us later.
Okay.
Other, you had, I
Yeah.
delayed you last time.
Yeah, going back to the legalities,
We gave you such good advice last time.
Have
Yeah.
an attorney over there.
No, but I was curious as to whether or not in this process through self-publishing, if you.
Independent publishing.
Okay, independent publishing,
Whatever.
okay. If you have access or know somebody that an aspiring author could be referred to as far as the copyright process, because my whole thing is the writing, I can do. Publishing, I'll figure that out. I'm more concerned about making sure that I'm legally protected and that my work's legally protected, because I'm not putting one thing out there. I don't care what it is, it just won't get done if I don't have the confidence that my work is legally protected.
Why would it not be legally protected?
It's about judges, right?
No, we still have freedom of speech. I mean, we have more protections in the United States on what you write than almost anything else,
Well,
unless you
I'm with you like
are
this.
deliberately and aggressively slanderous and libelous.
Well, no, that's not the case.
Well, if that's not the case, I
Right.
think you have no problem.
Well, the problem is that I've been disillusioned by the system and I have no confidence in it, and my work will document that. And so considering that I want to be
As long as
cautious
it's in
to
good
make sure
faith
they're
and you
protected.
represent that you're writing
Right.
the truth.
But then that's 10 years of a legal battle, like I've been in court before. So I'm just saying, I prefer to avoid it in the beginning because I'm not confident. That's what my whole work is about, because this whole system has completely disillusioned me and I can document it. Then I want to make sure, just out of an abundance of caution, because I don't want to be stuck for the next 15 years of my life, like I've spent the last 20 years of my life going around in the same circles with the same system that failed.
I think Wayne, would be fair to say if this thing really takes off, that there is going to have to be some kind of, legal, you know.
I think if you're an employee and it's about a judge, you have to be careful.
Oh,
If
I
you're
know.
an employee.
You know, I really think
Yeah.
that most political figures don't litigate what's written because it brings more attention to what's written than it does the truth or fallacy of it. So I wouldn't have an opinion without knowing more about it,
Okay.
whether or not you have any risk. But, you know, every day in the paper we can read outrageous things about judges, politicians, and it's just another day in the city. So unless you've got, you know, Edwin Edwards-sized crimes that you can document in some, you know, specific level.
I do. In fact, my attorney actually was the one that had a recall petition against Edwards in '92. So.
I just, you know, I just think you need to work these things out, and a publisher can't work this out for you.
Right,
You
but
and
that's
your
why I'm
lawyer
trying,
needs to work this
that's why I'm
out.
trying to find out when
The
you publish.
responsibility is yours, not the publisher.
I understand that, sir, but from your experience, since you're sitting on this panel and you've done social publishing, and I haven't read your books, I don't have the benefit of that knowledge, but that may or may not have been a problem that you may have encountered or issues that you may have confronted in your work. I can't say there was or wasn't. I'm asking a legitimate question, that's all.
And my experience, which is all I can share, is that from presidents on down, I've taken heat, and I think the least of the problems you ever have is somebody suing you.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of back up. Okay, Glenn has his kinetic book, and Diana has her beautiful book, and you have your social book, and Bradley has his haikus, and Glenn used the term personal authentication. So I'm thinking, I'm sitting here like, what does that really mean, and how can I kind of bring something up inside of me? What, do you have any advice on that? Personal
I think this is a question for
authentication.
you, Glenn.
Well, I think Brantley kind of answered the question, and Will and I can also speak from my own experience. I don't care how many copies of this are sold, it's a great experience to write it, because goddamn it, I've written my, you know, when I write my book, well, I've written my goddamn book, okay, and I've skewered all my enemies, and you know, made all my points, and I feel very good about it. So, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter how many copies I've
Can I
done it.
say something?
Yes, baby.
I think that everybody has a story within themselves, some kind of something. So therefore, what we're all doing, if we write something, is actually we're writing history. That may not be the history books in school, you know, about World War II or whatever, but we're writing about, you know, like the little girl that wrote the book on Bend in the Bayou. She's writing history. People 100 years from now can read about how this neighborhood looked, that they had a coffee house here, that writers sat down there writing, and that they had a beautiful bayou and a beautiful church and cemeteries, and, you know, so that's the whole idea of writing, is, you know,
Tell your own story.
tell your story.
I don't know if people have had this experience. I was actually, before I ended up in New Orleans, was raised in the West, and we've always found huge value in these letters written by pioneer women or people who were first moving into this part of Wyoming or that part of Montana, and these are, I don't know what Glenn means by personal authentication, but these are stories they had to tell of their lives that they told simply and poignantly, and if you're interested in that period, they're invaluable. I hate to, you know, now that I'm more of an e-booker than a print guy, I hate to tell you how many books are still on our shelves, you know, that are right here in that frame of writing. So I think a lot of these things are valuable. Now, some of them aren't 1,000 pages valuable. Some of them might be, you know, of different weight depending on who's interested. But
Well, I was thinking, it brought it up when you were talking about your hometown law.
Yeah.
It's something personal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And history. Yeah.
well, I think in her case, it's such a companion to what the rest of the work is. It makes the whole work of art work better if she's got a way that people can walk home with a piece of it as well. So I think she, there may be an analogous situation for many of you in other pursuits. Any questions on this in the second room?
Well, it's not directly pertinent to this, yes. Hi there. I had an idea somewhat recently. I'm just wondering if you guys, I'm not too familiar with the ebook publishing world. I mean, peripherally aware that it is large and out there, but have not explored it in any regards. And this ties into an analogy with music and kind of, that's mainly my background, what I'm aware with friends, myself, getting that hustle coming up in the music industry, business, anything. And I was thinking about the idea of mixtapes and how that could be translated to like lit mixtapes or like different selections that can be from famous works, from friends, and then also your own writing. And not have it, because a mixtape isn't like a CD with a pretty cover or anything. So it's not, I don't think it's be quite the same as a book, like a collection of stories. It'd be something a little more visceral and kind of personal. So I think maybe that could find fruition on the format of ebook or something. But I'm wondering if there's anything like this, because I would be totally unaware of it.
Well, I think it's a fascinating modern development that the more you can move into different platforms with whatever, this is back to your point, but I think your point is similar. So right now I'm helping reorganize our radio station in Little Rock, 100,000 watts. It's a community radio station. We organized it 30-odd years ago. But it's sort of interesting. So if you do a piece on the radio and you record it, then you have, it's on the web as well. So it had a life when people listen to it coming out of the dial. It has another life on our website because you can stream it. If it's a podcast, you can listen to it concurrently, not just in Little Rock, Arkansas, or throughout Arkansas, but anywhere in the world. And it just keeps on rolling along those lines. So to the degree you put it in, you put the playlist and the podcast and put it on YouTube, and then it's also on Facebook and also on Twitter. You start multiplying the number of times, your core audience, maybe as it is in our station, 20,000 people a week, but you're adding these additional layers. And I think part of the challenge of writing is in some ways the same, and of sales. Not everybody may be performing their work and then able to sell it, but to the degree you're willing to take that product of what your creativity is, not just leave it in the covers, but get it out in other ways, read it, make something of it, put it on a website, put it on,
But I feel that with the increased access that these opportunities provides, I feel like authors are now coming to a position that musicians have been in for a while, which is like a lot of other people doing the thing as well. And so I think the idea why I like the mixtape is I think that really helped a music artist kind of get out, and it breaks things down more, so it's more manageable. So I feel like maybe the idea of what we're trying to push as authors needs to be a little more transmutable, or just able to be broken down, or like chapter by chapter in different selections. But then, so I don't know.
I understand it's a big conversation,
If you want a mixtape analogy where you really want something from a famous author, you're going to find there's no good way to rip.
Right, so it's like legality comes into play as well.
I won't say that. I'm sure if you look hard enough on the internet, you can find the way to rip an ebook out of your Kindle and get it on your computer. I'm sure.
It's pre-shots, I'm sure.
It's really not as hard as you think.
But those things like that are locked down. So you really couldn't take a chapter from a book or a story or something that was only in an ebook that you loved and get it onto your mixtape and share it with your friends because it's locked down. You can't.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting any fragment of this idea could even just be of the community.
Unless you want to type it again.
Yeah.
Well, there's an argument in the New York Times. 3 weeks ago, there was a Chinese author named Hua who said, essentially, I'm okay with my books being pirated in China because the level of poverty is such that if they can get the price down to effectively $1 a book, I'm for that because as long as we have this kind of disparity, I want more people to read my book. Today in the Times, you have Scott Turow, who's a famous best-selling novelist, talking exactly the opposite, complaining about the fact that libraries would be letting you check out ebooks as many times as you wanted on your device because he said it would affect the income stream of authors. Outside of the US, I actually help people translate my books into Spanish so that they can move them out there. And I help people break the copyright in India and China because I want people to read my book in India and China. I mean, what, I need 3 rupees? I mean, that's what, 10 cents? I mean, is that gonna be my piece of, I'm gonna like lose sleep if, I mean, God, I organize in India. Why wouldn't I want as many people as possible in India to know about my work? It's a cinch. Social policy doesn't have those resources as a press to sell it, and my other publishers had no clue about how to do it or no interest. They didn't see how they could make money. I appreciate that.
David Simon knew that you could readily acquire a copy of The Wire in a gas station in Baltimore, and he approved of that because he knew that the audience that was buying it while they were picking up a bag of wings was not the audience that could go down to Barnes and Nobles and plop down $79 for a box set of a season of The Wire. He wanted those people to see it too. I heard it at what's the wings, Purple Wings place. I didn't go there to check yet, but he wanted audiences that wouldn't be able to, don't have HBO, wouldn't be able to afford his work that he was trying to speak to, have access to his work. So he was perfectly happy knowing that those pirate copies were out floating around in those communities.
But I think that's why it's an interesting question, maybe not the question for tonight, about how we see the democratization of work and versus income versus all those things, and those are troubling, difficult questions. You have to make a living doing what you're doing. I assume. Other people do it as a hobby, but you know, my basic living is organizing, so I can run a coffee house to support organizing. I can write and hope. I want to change the conversation, so what I want is more people to read it. So I may have a different philosophy about that, but I mean, I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's another name for a mixtape. It's called an anthology. If you have a lot of friends who are writing various things.
Well, that's why I think it's a little too
or a
formalized.
zine. It's a small step from producing a zine on a Xerox machine to building up a stable of contributors who who are putting together work you think deserves to be between covers and across from the coffee shop down here, or in Octavia Books or wherever.
But see, the idea, I mean, I'm not like slavishly devoted to this, but just my point with this is like, it's really just
We don't
an
want
idea.
any slavish devotion, okay?
Yeah.
Cut that out, right?
Oh, if I'm freed from it, I will cut it out. But I just, the idea of the mixtape, like, is putting it on the other side, like people making the choices, like I like this and I like this. And like, this is not something we probably have the answer to do, so I'm not like asking for anything, but just if we've heard anything that's kind of like this, that's putting it more in the hands of, it's like the consumer taking back power of what they want to consume and what they want to share with other people.
Exactly, and ideas are good, and your ideas are very good.
Yeah, and you know, there's probably, if you could embellish your playlist, you know, with stories of why you selected, you know, a certain song at this point, and then how it might have worked in a particular, at a party or something like that. It could work very well as a book.
Right, as a book.
Yeah.
Or an ebook. I mean, there's a site
Or
called The
ebook,
Rumpus.
ebook, yeah.
There's a site called The Rumpus published a collection of the poetry that they had published online in their online journal, but it published it as an iPad app with all sorts of multimedia.
So we got about 5 more minutes for questions or comments before, and then it's not like people are gonna disappear. You can catch
What
people
about this
individually.
beautiful young aspiring writer?
Oh, well, it's all really fascinating to hear about. I really don't have anything near completion, but it's fun to think about publishing in this way.
Great.
I'm just interested in hearing about what's going on in the field.
Any other comments or questions in the back over there, or?
Me?
No, anybody. I don't even know who's back there.
I'm just giving it general.
Well, friends are good. So I'm going to thank, this has been a great dialogue. It far exceeded, as I've already said, my expectations. And I think Glenn deserves 1,000% of the credit for tonight, because he just kept pushing until we, you know, did try to find out if there was people who wanted to learn, open up the conversation, think about it. And I think Although we just barely touched on some of the issues, it was a fascinating conversation. We have these dialogues usually once a month if we've got something that's worth it. Always either on Monday or Tuesday, you know, because there's a poster across from the coffee bar, and there's a slip about that size that tells you the next topic. All of you who signed the attendance list will get notified of future dialogues, so if you didn't get your name in there, your phone number is always interesting, but it's all by email, so that's the one not to forget to put there. And I want to thank you again for supporting Fairgrinds as a coffee house and for making us what a real coffee house should be, which is a place for community people to come together, to talk about new things, to explore ideas, to learn from each other, and to see what might come with these kinds of collaborations. So thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.